Our next speaker is Mr. Tom Kubic. Everybody knows Tom. He's an instructor associate instructor at John Jay College in New York. Most of you have seen him do papers and presentations before and seen some of his publications. Tom has a PhD degree with concentration in forensic science from City University of New York, has a master's degree in chemistry from Long Island University, and a law degree from St. John's University. Tom?
Thanks, Glenn. Thanks, Glenn. So back at the symposium every 3 years, I'm happy to be here. I thank you for the invite. I think this is an opportunity for me to be on a soapbox again, which is very unusual for me. But I think it's important to think about the following topics, and this is what I'm going to try to portray in this case report. We're getting a lot, we as trace evidence examiners or transfer evidence examiners are getting a lot of heat from, we'll say, the press, from attorneys, and from people who really don't understand our profession, where they're saying, you ought to operate in the lab with no contextual information at all, which is absolutely crazy. I mean, you just cannot go ahead and analyze the fibers. Look at all the cases you've heard. You've heard Ken's case, you've heard the English case. You have to know the context. You just can't say, well, here's 20 fibers and what can you tell me about them? Well, you might be able to tell them a lot, but the chances are you're not going to be able to help the investigator at all. And so we need to resist that. We need to be able to know what the context is that we're examining. The other point I want to make is we hear these wonderful cases and they're great. But most of the time, what are we doing when we do an examination? We are either trying to confirm someone's story or what? Knock it out of the box. Some guy says, in the case from England, a guy says, well, I didn't know these people at all. I've never seen these women at all. They say, yeah, but your D is there. Well, I see them routinely because I'm not happy at home. So he keeps changing his story. And this helps the investigator untold how much it helps them. So in the case that I'm going to talk about, the slaughter of the Belgian soldiers in Rwanda, it was very important for Pete Dysek, my associate from John Jay, and I to get an awful lot of contextual information. We had to know the history of the conflict, we had to know what kind of weapons were involved, and we had to know what weapons were in the hands of what people. So some of the history of this, for some of you who may not be familiar, is this battle or racial battle between the Tutsis and the Hutus go back to the tribal times of pre-colonial times in Africa. During the 1960s, you had the big independence movement. So now the hands of the political power for that area of Africa, which used to be in the hands of the Tutsis, which older people like myself would know as the Watusi, changed hands into those of the Hutu who were more populous. In the 1994 unrest, what really brought it to a head is the president of Rwanda was assassinated by a missile that shot down his plane when it was coming in for a landing. The Hutu majority blamed the Tutsis for this assassination. Without getting into a lot of details, there may be some real reasons to suspect that's the case. And this gave them the reason to go out